we open with a police car driving through the streets while a voice speaks over the police radio. And it's kind of setting up what I think is the major world of this film, which is kind of police work, or the world of police. And we see a man on the street. He hides from the police car. And then he goes into a cafe and he hands the owner his gun. And the owner hides the gun in a cash register. Two cops come in and they wind up booking the man on vagrancy charges and they take him in. And we see an old-fashioned police lineup. It's a room full of cops and witnesses. It feels like an auction. All these people are waiting for a suspect that they're going to bid on. And the suspects are in the same room with all the witnesses. They're not behind glass. There's no two-way mirror. And that may become significant in a moment. So this is where we find out about our man, the guy we saw get arrested. His name is Dix Handley. He's 36 years old, born in Kentucky. And he was arrested for illegal possession of firearms and sentenced to 1 to 5 years, but he escaped prison and then was rearrested, etc. He's got a long, criminal record. And the witness, who's perhaps going to ID him for pulling an armed robbery the night before, the witness refuses to ID him. And the impression that we get is that he's lying, and the cop, who happens to be named Lieutenant Dietrich, is upset by this and surprised. And you get the sense that this is probably typical, that these witnesses are maybe afraid and refuse to ID the guy. And who can blame them when the guy's in the same room with them and is able to see them? So the commissioner calls Dietrich in and sort of gives him a long list of crimes that are going on in his precinct. And Dietrich says that he knows who the guy is who's doing these, and it's Dix Handley, our friend. And but the witness got cold feet and he backed down. So the commissioner says, well, lean on that witness harder. And then he asks questions like, why are the gambling parlors still open? Smash them harder. And it seems to me like the commissioner is almost condoning police violence here, or police brutality. He's like, just, get more violent with these guys, do something. And hand in hand with the fact that they bring him in for vagrancy, which is kind of a trumped up charge, the impression I get here is that the police may not be entirely noble or above board. And I feel that this is our kind of introduction to this world. What do you think about that?
Yeah, first of all, let's go to the name of our lead character. Dix Handley. It sounds like Dick Handy or something, or like I don't know. It sounds like maybe a play on words, or maybe like an inside joke or something, but a masturbation joke or something. But yeah, this kind of plays into what a lot of 80s films would be. So I grew up probably in like late 80s, 90s, watching like a lot of action movies. And they would have these like weird name. I think even The Simpsons made fun of it once too, like Max Powers and like, Strong Armley or something like that. Maybe
Yes.
This is where it started. Movies like this, where it's just like, you can't just have like a regular name for your tough guy. The tough guys always have to have tough guy names. And if you didn't know this guy was a tough guy by the fact that like, he's scraping his skull as he walks into a door, because he's so tall and so brooding. Just the name alone, Dix Handley, says it all, So it's a seedy world. He's a seedy character. I think the tone is beautifully set. They set up Lieutenant Dietrich, which I thought was going to be a more prominent character, but he disappears for a while and then comes back at the end. Which again, this movie's longer than other films at its time frame, almost 2 hours, so it had time to do things like that. Instead of just being a nameless, fameless character, they give you time to set him up a little bit. So when he comes back at the end, it's like you have certain feelings for him, either good or bad, but at least you feel something when you see him on screen. So yeah, I like the setup so far. I'm intrigued and I want to see more.
for sure. And we learn right away about a character named Doc, Erwin Riedenschneider. And we learn this from the commissioner, who's still kind of giving shit to Lieutenant Dietrich here because apparently this Doc guy has just been released from prison. And Dietrich and his men were supposed to be watching him, keeping an eye on him. And Doc managed to give them the slip. And so he's missing now. They don't know where he is. The commissioner's mad, and he wants Dietrich to fix this situation. And then from there, we actually get to meet Doc as a cabbie drops him off. And what I find really interesting is we don't see his face right away. It's really kind of an interesting moment. The car kind of cuts off his face from our view, and then he turns and walks into the building. And so we're seeing him from behind. And we follow him a long way, and he goes to a door and he talks to someone. And he's kind of a shadow, and we don't see him at all. And then finally, as he's waiting for somebody to come out and talk to him, he turns back toward us and kind of walks toward us, kind of pacing around. And so we finally see his face. I found that kind of a really interesting introduction of the character. And so he winds up meeting with this guy, Cobby, who we learn very quickly is a bookie. And Doc is pitching him on an idea. But Cobby is not really interested until he figures out who Doc is, and then he gets excited. So Doc has a plan for a caper that will earn $500,000, but he needs $50,000 up front to sort of operate. And Cobby doesn't really have that kind of money, but perhaps a guy named Mr. Emmerich does. And Doc knows that Cobby can connect him to Mr. Emmerich. So that's this sort of section here. What did you think about this?
Yeah, so I was fascinated with the Doc character, and it kind of, like I said previously, I grew up on kind of like 80s and 90s, movies and TV shows and such. So while these movies are a little bit older for me in terms of like having a direct influence on me, I think these movies had an influence on the people that made the movies and TV shows that I watched. Because here you have this Doc character, short, unassuming, polite, smart, and then you got the muscle that's behind him in Dix Handley, And how many like TV shows or movies or cartoons have you seen where you have this mastermind, unassuming bad guy and this big brooding guy that's the muscle, Speaking of 80s action movies, Thunderdome, Mad Max, Master Blaster, and just like countless other things you can think of where you have this quiet, like polite, unassuming guy, but he's very dangerous. His mind is dangerous. And I'll just beat him up. No, but he's got this brooding muscle behind him, So I like the dynamic that would later develop with him and Dix. And I like this character. I thought his character was interesting in that he wasn't like a tough talking, or he wasn't intimidating. He wasn't what you would expect, but he works.
Yeah, I like him a lot too, and I would call him kind of the gentleman bandit or something like that. He's kind of the very gentlemanly good guy in a way. He just happens to be a bad guy. And we'll see over the course of the film that he actually is very reasonable in a lot of situations. He's
very pragmatic.
Yeah. And, again, the idea that are these guys good or are they bad? He seems like kind of a good guy most of the time. But we'll talk more about that as we go. And it's interesting that right away is where we do kind of get to know Dix, because Dix comes in while Doc is there, and he's wanting to see Cobby because he wants to make a bet, but he already owes $2,300 and a little more. And so Cobby says, yeah, okay, he gives him permission, but he manages to offend Dix. And Dix says one of the most interesting lines in the movie. He says, "Don't bone me. Don't bone me." And he basically says he's going to go and get all the money he owes right now. And so he goes back and he wants to get his gun from the cafe owner where, it was stashed earlier. The cafe owner, we learn, is a guy named Gus. And he says no, and he sort of gives them advice, knock off for a while. The police are all over, the situation's too hot. And he even offers to give Dix the money that he needs to pay off his debt so that he will owe Gus instead of Cobby. And so, again, we're seeing Gus as a pretty good guy here. He's helping out his friend here, and he's willing to give him essentially all the money he has to help him out. And then he winds up calling a guy, Louis Ciavelli, to ask for $1,300 as part of the money to give to Dix. And this is where we meet Louis Ciavelli, who will become important. And he's got a wife and kids, which we will also keep hearing about throughout the movie. We also meet a woman named Doll, who visits Dix. And she needs a place to stay for a couple of days. And he says, okay, but don't get any ideas. And we sort of get the sense that she maybe is in love with him, and he's kind of, a little bit aloof. Any thoughts on this deepening of the Dix character?
You want me to go deep in Dick?
Only if you want to. Only
Pause. So yeah, there's an assault of characters here, because there's a lot of characters being thrown at you here, and you learn a little bit about all of them, despite the fact that there's an assault on characters in this segment of the movie. So what do we know about Dix? We know that he's kind of self-destructive in a way, in that like he has, even after he leaves, Cobb says, oh, he always loses or whatever, he's just a degenerate gambler. He doesn't think much of him. And that gives you a little insight to Cobb. He's not very loyal. You just threw him under the bus as soon as he left. So he doesn't really have much of a spine. That shows you a little bit about who Cobb is, or Cobby. And Dix, he has a gambling problem. He's a little hot-headed. He just, give me my gun, like I'll figure this out, So he has his little addiction. We know Doll, she has a soft spot for him. That's her weakness. We see Doc looking at the calendar with the beautiful women. We know that's his weakness. And poor was it Louis is the other guy, or Louis?
Yeah, I think so. Yes,
yeah. Well, that character, we know the minute he, poor guy, the minute he started, he was about to leave. He's talking about his kid, and then he's about to leave, and then he goes back and shows Doc the photos of his kid. Mm-hmm. I'm like, this guy's he's not going to make it through this movie. Exactly. The minute he started showing off photos of his kid, I'm like, he's going to die. He's going to die for sure. I've seen enough movies to know the minute he starts talking about his kid, I'm like, they're setting us up to let us know that character ain't going to make it to the end of the movie. So we already know what his situation is. So not only are all these, again, you're being assaulted by a lot of characters, but you know a little bit about each of them. And the information you're given is going to be pivotal to either who that character is or how their downfall is going to play out.
Yeah, for sure. So then from there, we get the plan as Doc pitches Emmerich with Cobby. Needs $50,000. They need a fence or maybe 2 or 3 fences to sell the jewels when they steal them. They need 3 guys, a boxman, a driver, and a hooligan. And Emmerich offers to look into selling the stuff himself, instead of going through a fence. You'll make more money. Let me do it. Let me look into it. And then we meet Emmerich's mistress, who is Marilyn Monroe. She calls him Uncle Lon, and very good performance, very good character. Emmerich calls his private detective buddy Bob Banham, and he sends him out to collect debts that are owed to him, so he can raise the $50,000 to pay for this heist here. They owe him $100,000 total, so he figures he can easily get the money. Any thoughts about this?
Yeah. So we see Emmerich, and his attitude is kind of weird, because you're thinking, oh, here's this big money guy, and he says something odd. If he's the big money guy, they're talking about $500,000. And when you talk about $500,000 you're going to be making, and you only got to pay this one guy 50 grand. Like, why is he volunteering to do it himself? Generally, these big money guys keep their hands clean. They don't do things that are like, hey, like, hey, I manage a hotel, right? Sometimes I have to do stuff like unclogging toilets and things like that. I'm going to be the GM soon. But I'm not going to say, hey, like, you know what? Instead of me hiring a housekeeper, why don't I just clean the rooms? Yeah, yeah, it's like you wouldn't expect that. I mean, you can do it, but you wouldn't expect it. It's like, wait a minute, aren't you busy doing other things? Like, wouldn't you hire someone with, you know, delegate, like why would you get your hands dirty? For me, literally, but for him figuratively, when you could just, yeah, what's $50,000? You're the money guy, you're gonna be making all this money. So his behavior was kind of peculiar there. And then yeah, his henchman, definitely, definitely shady, definitely someone who you think is gonna play into the film with his attitude. Like this kind of tough guy. There's another tough guy in this movie. You kind of had a feeling these tough guys are gonna have some kind of a showdown. That's how these
Yes.
things typically play out. So you kind of saw, yeah, let's see, you kind of anticipate a showdown with him and Dix a little bit. And of course, as you mentioned, Marilyn Monroe, in a very small role, but she certainly is not your typical film noir. She doesn't have the acting chops for that, but she certainly does well in this very limited role. And it's good to see a young, very beautiful Marilyn Monroe in this film.
Yes, for sure. And so then Dix talks about his childhood and a horse and the family farm and how it all goes bad. And it's his dream to sort of buy back the family farm someday. He also talks about losing all his money on a horse, and he figures that, well, his luck has to turn one of these days. He pays Cobby back the money that he owes, and he once again says, "You boned me." And Cobby apologizes, and he introduces Dix to Doc, and kind of refers to him as a hooligan. And Doc sort of takes interest and goes, "He's a hooligan?" So then Doc sort of talks about the fact that he's heard that Emmerich is broke, and Cobby says, "No, that's not true." And then Lieutenant Dietrich comes in, and he kind of goes out again, and he says, "I didn't see anybody." And then he kind of says to Cobby, "You're going to have to stand still for a raid." Cobby kind of argues with him, and so they wind up saying, "Okay, well, you close up." And so basically what we're kind of learning here is that Lieutenant Dietrich is on the take. He's not a clean cop, whereas in the first scene he seemed completely above board and very concerned, and we kind of felt sorry for him because things are going wrong. But it turns out he's on the take, which puts a whole new slant on the fact that the gambling parlors are still open and he's not smashing them hard enough. Doc comments that he doesn't trust cops. He says, "Experience has taught me never to trust a policeman. Just when you think one's all right, he turns legit." Any thoughts on any of this?
A lot of foreshadowing here. A lot of foreshadowing. Dix with the horse.
Yes.
First of all, it makes you empathize with him. He's not just
Yes.
a degenerate gambler. You kind of know where the gambling is coming from. He's just desperate to get back to the past and get back that house, get back to a better time in his life, maybe mentally, maybe it's metaphorically he wants it, not just literally. And the gambling and losing his money on a horse, wanting to get back to the farm with the horses. It's just a lot of foreshadowing, a lot more insight to his character. And again, with Doc, about a bad cop going good, foreshadowing there. The dynamic
Yes.
with Cobb and Dietrich, where it's just like, hey, Cobb kind of has the upper hand when Dietrich is dirty, but when Dietrich turns clean, then the power balance kind of flips. While he's dirty, he's kind of he's at the mercy of the criminals. When he's clean, he's kind of at the mercy of the law and his superiors. So you kind of see there's a lot of foreshadowing with a lot of stuff going on here. Also with Emmerich, the whole thing, like not, thinking that he's broke. Again, a lot of
Yeah,
things are being set up.
yeah, absolutely. And yeah, it does humanize Dix a little bit more. Like he's not just a thug. He's not just a bad guy. He's got these very human feelings, and he's kind of sensitive. He wants to get back to that family farm. So yeah, it's all very interesting. So from here, the private detective Bob Bannum comes up empty. Emmerich is upset, and he confesses that he's broke and he needs a way out. He's desperate. And he basically convinces Bob to help him double cross the others. And he basically suggests that they're going to steal the gems and they'll split the proceeds 50-50. And yeah, so this is where things are really starting to turn. And the team is put together. Louis Ciavelli, the man with the wife and kids, he's the box man. He's going to be the guy who opens the safe. And Ciavelli, he suggests Gus as the getaway driver, Gus being our diner owner, the hunchback. And then Doc asks about Dick's Handley, for the hooligan, because he's met him in the office a couple of times and he kind of liked him, and so they say, okay, sure, why not? At this point, Doll moves out of his place and moves in with a girlfriend, and she gives Dix the address where she will be. And then they plan the heist, and Doc asks Dix about Emmerich, and he admits that he doesn't trust him, and he wants Dix sort of prepared in case things go wrong. And when we see Emmerich, he's packing suitcase, his passport, everything. And his wife wants him to stick around and play cards and spend time with her, but he says, no, I gotta go take care of business. And so that's when we're about to move into the next section. Any thoughts on all of this?
Yeah, thank God the driver he recommended was a character that was already set up for us.
Exactly.
Or we'd have to more characters and more introductions and more backstories and more foreshadowing. So yeah, it just so happens that Gus, a character we already saw, happens to be someone he recommends to be the driver. But aside from that plot device there, a lot of interesting things going on, a lot of layers being added to what is already a pretty layered film as we're already watching. So not only do we have the typical scene where it's like, all right, we're planning out the heist. You do this, it's a scene you've seen a lot of times in a lot of movies, either legitimate movies or parodies of these movies, but it's a scene you've seen a million times where they plan it out. You do this, you do that, this guy does this guy does that, and all the whole plan's going to come together. And then we get a snag in that plan where we have betrayal. So it's not just the anticipation of, is it going to go down? Is it going to go down without a hitch? Like, is something going to go wrong? But we also have, even if it goes right, then there's this other layer of betrayal that's going to happen to once the heist is over. So it gives you more anticipation. You're anticipating the heist going down and what's going to happen after the heist goes down with this betrayal. So there's a lot of tension going on. And another layer. So you just thought that, this Emmerich guy just had, a young mistress, but it turns out he also has a wife. And she seems like a nice character, which again adds another layer to this. Like, wait a minute, he's married, like, so
Yeah.
and they make her a nice character, and they gave her some vulnerability in that you see there's certain awareness that she has that, like, she's trying to keep up appearances and look pretty for him and things like that. So definitely a lot of layers added to the film at this point.
Yes, absolutely. And this is where we pull the heist. And as we've maybe already referred to, you can see the tropes of every other heist movie that's ever come after this. it's all very familiar, but I think perhaps very fresh in its day. And one of the most important moments is when the box man is about to open the safe, and he's using, I believe, nitroglycerin. And he says, it's going to take a lot to blow this baby. And he does, but this is where it all goes bad because the explosion is so big that it sets off several alarms in the neighborhood. So now there's a lot of attention being drawn, and they can hear sirens coming. And so they have to make a decision. What do? And they decide, we're going to keep going. We've come this far. We're going to get the jewels, and they do. But unfortunately, on the way out, Dick slugs the watchman, but the watchman's gun goes off and hits Ciavelli. Ciavelli being the man with the wife and kids that we keep hearing about throughout the film. And Gus wants to take him to a doctor, but he says, no, take me home. Take me home. So Doc and Dix go to Emmerich's place, but they see through Emmerich's attempt to stall them, and realizing this, Banham kind of goes rogue and he pulls his gun, and there's a bit of a standoff, and he winds up getting shot and killed by Dix, but Dix also gets shot kind of in the side. It's a flesh wound, it's not too bad, but obviously the double cross has not gone the way it should, and Dix wants to kill Emmerich, but Doc stops him. And this is one of the interesting moments where Doc really shows his kind of, I don't know, his humanity or something. He kind of scolds Emmerich for this stupid plan of his, and he asks him questions, and he basically says to him, you know what, why don't you call the insurance company, because they will probably pay, no questions asked, to get these jewels back. And so he seems like a person of character, Doc. He's kind of being helpful even in this situation when they could just kill the guy and run out with the jewels. It's like, no, we're kind of screwed here. This has gone bad. Just give the jewels back to the insurance company. We'll get less money, but hey, we'll all do okay. He's taken the high road. He's the voice of reason here. And meanwhile, Ciavelli's wife wants him taken to the hospital. But, that would mean it would get reported and he'd get arrested. And so Gus sends for a doctor that they can trust. So maybe I'll just ask you at this point, do you have anything to say about this?
Yeah, so this happens kind of halfway, or not even halfway through the film. The heist goes down. So generally these heist movies play out in one or two ways. One, it happens early on, and then the heist just sets up other things. The fallout from the heist then becomes the main storyline. Or if the heist happens towards the end of the film, then the heist is the main storyline. So because the heist was happening so early, you kind of realize this movie is not peaking with the heist. It's peaking with the aftermath of the heist. So the heist was interesting, a lot of tension, a lot of things that were set up paid off. Oh man, I love my wife and kid. I look at my kid. Oh man, I'm such a proud dad. Oh, I'm shot, fatally shot.
Yes. Oh dear. Yeah.
Who saw that coming?
Everyone, I think. Yes.
So I thought it was interesting in that also it gave the way the film played out. It gave Gus something to do. Gus, otherwise kind of an innocuous character, except he happens to have a hunchback, which I didn't even realize honestly till like deep into the film. I'm like, oh, he's a hunchback, because it was kind of understated. The guy kind of made a joke at him when he threw him out the bar, when he said threw him out the diner when he said he ran over cats and stuff. So he made a joke about him. I thought he was just joking. I didn't realize he was an actual hunchback. So yeah, it gave him something to do in that dynamic where he's then arguing with the wife about calling the doctor and things like that. So I thought that was interesting, because typically in these movies, back then they weren't long enough. So when they talked about certain, like, spouses and stuff, if it wasn't the spouse of a main character, they may not get any screen time. So I was even shocked that we saw his wife on screen, that she was an actual character. So the
Yeah.
interaction with her and Gus I thought was interesting because it was unexpected. It wasn't scenes that I thought we would end up seeing coming. I just thought we'd hear off screen, oh, he died, and that would be
Yeah.
the end of his character and the end of everything, the end of the
Yeah.
Hunchback, the end of all that stuff. So I thought those scenes were great. They added more tension and more drama to the film, and of course the betrayal. And as the
Yes.
betrayal scene is happening, again, I thought I saw this movie, but at this point I'm realizing I never saw it because there's so much going on that I don't have any memory of. But as the scene is playing, I'm like, this scene's kind of going on pretty long. I'm like, they're not going to believe him. If they were going to believe him, this scene would have ended already. So it's like the longer he
Yeah.
keeps saying, yeah, and then the more he keeps having to explain himself, I'm getting the sense that, like, oh, like, shit's gonna go down here and now. Like, this isn't gonna
Yeah.
be a betrayal they find out later, they come back for revenge. I'm like, no, this is gonna play out now, how long this scene is playing out. And then you
Yeah.
got your showdown, with the two tough guys and the shootout, and Dix gets shot. And this is where I realize that I love dark endings. Like, for me, growing up, some of my favorite movies were like those 1970s, I think they were the 70s, might have been the 60s, Shaw Brothers films,
Mm.
those kung fu films, because they would always end, and most of the time the hero would die at the end. And it's like, it was so different from every other thing you see where it's just a happy ending. And I was like, I love dark endings, but holy shit, this is a bleak movie. Like, nothing is going right for anyone. These
Yeah.
characters started off at the bottom, and they're just getting lower somehow. Like, nothing.
Yeah.
Like, they make you care about these characters because you empathize because they're in such bad situations. And
Yeah.
the situations just get worse. Usually in some of these, like, even like Across 110th Street, a kind of a bleak film, at least they have the money for a little while, and then the mob
Yep.
comes and gets back at them. But there's no respite of there's no period of time where it's just like, all right, they're enjoying life. No, life is just shit, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. Oh yeah, you happy? You got a nice family? Here's a bullet to the gut. Oh, you think you got a nice husband? Oh, your husband's about to die in the bedroom next to your kid. It's like, oh, Sterling Hayden, yeah, you just saved him. Oh, you got shot too. It's just like, and the guy who's doing the betrayal, he like breaks down and just says, oh, like, I'm pathetic. Like, I have nothing.
Yeah.
So it just felt really, really bleak to me, the movie.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely, and we're not even at the end yet. It's already
No.
it's already there. But yeah, and so surprisingly, Emmerich winds up dumping his buddy Bob's body in the river, which surprised me, because it seems, like, again, like he would have somebody else to do that, or he wouldn't want to dirty his hands, but he dumps the body. And the police come to see him, and he is making nice with his wife at that point. They're actually having kind of a nice moment. And the police explain to him that Bob is dead. They found him in the water, and in his pocket, he had a list of a bunch of names on Emmerich's letterhead. And so Emmerich explains, oh, yeah, those are the guys who owe me money, and Bob was trying to get the money back, et cetera, et cetera. And they question Emmerich, and he lies about his whereabouts and says that he was with his mistress, Angela. And so they say, okay, cool, they leave. And then he calls Angela and basically tells her to say that he was there. And then he winds up, when he tells his wife the bad news, and she's like, oh man, that's horrible, criminals, blah, blah, blah. He says, crime is only a left-handed form of human endeavor, which I find quite interesting. So meanwhile, Doc and Dix, Doc has to talk him down when the news hits the newspaper that Emmerich, what's happened here, and you know, Doc says, no, Emmerich did not betray us. I guess the news hit the paper that Doc is probably the one behind this. And so Emmerich didn't betray us because, there's only 2 or 3 guys who could have pulled this heist, and they know, and so they just kind of guessed that it's me. And again, I found it interesting that he was kind of being the voice of reason there. They wind up going to Dahl's place, and Doc itemizes how everything went wrong for no good reason. And Dahl sees that he's the one with the price on his head, and perhaps is thinking that they could turn him in, but Dix shuts her down right away. Because Dix basically is a man of honor. This is what we've kind of learned about him. He owes money. Well, damn it, he's going to go get that money and he's going to pay it back. And then when he gets mad at Emmerich, it's like, what's wrong with you, man? Like, you don't have any honor. And so here, he could probably turn on Doc, but he's not going to because he's a man of honor. So yeah, I find that very interesting. And as the police are sort of, closing in here, and they know that they're looking for, or they're talking about Emmerich here. They suspect him, and the commissioner says, "An educated man who uses his brains to circumvent the law. Worst type of human being. No excuse for it." Again, another line that I like. So a taxi driver fingers Doc, or rather he says that he went to see Cobby, and so they call Lieutenant Dietrich, and Dietrich basically turns on Cobby, and he basically tells him to turn state's evidence, and he basically says, if we take you in, they're going to work you over at the station. They're going to beat you up, and you're not going to be able to take it. Which again, I find interesting. It's like the police are basically saying, hey, we're going to use illegal means here to make you talk. He also says the commish is out for blood, the commissioner, and it's not going to be mine. Cobby threatens to talk about Lieutenant Dietrich, and so Dietrich beats Cobby, and Cobby basically breaks. Thoughts?
Yeah, definitely interesting segment. It definitely shows you the character of Dix. He even gives Doc $1,000. It's like, not only is he not turning him in, he's giving him money. So
Yes.
they were going above and beyond to make Dix look like a good guy at this point. I was like, yeah, I could see him letting him go, but then giving him giving him money too. It's like, man, you really want us to side with Dix, don't you? Obviously Dahl, I mean, she is a good girl. She's just mixed up with this, and she loves Dix. A lot of women love Dix. So
Indeed.
But yeah, I mean, yeah, so definitely a lot of interesting. Again, Doc, very pragmatic guy, very even-tempered, doesn't go up or down, he's kind of just like level-headed the whole time, just trying to figure out, all right, what do we do now? Like, all right, yeah, this is the hand we're dealt. How are we going to deal with it? Speaking of hands being dealt, you also have an interesting sequence where you have Emmerich playing cards with his wife on the bed, and it cuts then to Dix and Doc, and Dix playing cards on the bed, so kind of like mirroring those two scenes as well. So definitely some interesting things done there. The drama, again, high tension, a lot of interesting things going on, and yeah, we're about to hit our climax.
Yeah, we are. We're getting close. Absolutely.
That's what she said.
Yeah. Yes. So next, Uncle Lon tells Angela that they'll go away together. But unfortunately, before they can, the commissioner and some of the cops show up, and they tell them that Cobby has signed a confession. And Emmerich sits down and reads it. Well, the police try to convince Angela to tell the truth about, the alibi that she gave to Emmerich. And when he's done reading the confession, he basically tells her, yeah, go ahead, tell the truth. And then he asks if it's okay if he goes and calls his wife. So they say, okay. So he goes into the other room, and then he writes a note to his wife, but then he tears it up, which I find very interesting. He wrote her a nice little note, but then he tears it up. And then he shoots himself, kills himself. So I find that very interesting. It's, there's a lot you can say about this character, being a sleazy guy, being a bad guy, but there is something classy about this ending where he kind of tells Angela to tell the truth, make sure she's not going to get in trouble, and then he seems to be wanting to do something for his wife, and I feel like even killing himself, it's almost like he's somehow doing something that's going to make things better. I don't know. It's hard for me to articulate it, but I find it very interesting. So then the police go and they try to arrest Ciavelli, but they discover that he's actually dead, and there's basically a funeral in progress. And they picked up Gus as well, as he was phoning, and he warns the others that trouble's coming. So then in Dahl's apartment, Doc reads about Emmerich's suicide, and he basically says he was a fool. He would have only gotten a couple of years. And this is the moment where Dix winds up giving him $1,000, and then Doc offers to give Dix some of the jewels, but Dix says no. He just wants to go back home to Kentucky. He doesn't even want anything. And Dix offers to find him a gun, but Doc says no, and he kind of gives us his philosophy of not carrying a gun, which makes perfect sense. If you carry a gun, you wind up murdering a police officer. You're kind of screwed, but if you don't have a gun, well, you just get arrested. No problem. So then Dahl gets a car, but she insists on going with Dix. And, again, we really get the sense that she's in love with Dix. And he kind of looks at her and he says, I don't get it. I just don't get it. So I'm not sure if he doesn't get that she loves him or if he just doesn't understand that she loves him. So Doc persuades a taxi driver to drive him to Cleveland. They stop at a roadside diner where Doc becomes entranced by a pretty young woman dancing to jukebox tunes. And he watches her, but the cabbie tries to get him to leave. And so this is a moment that I find very interesting here. What do you think about this moment where he winds up giving her some nickels so she can play the music? Is this a kind of a sleazy moment, do you think? Or is he just kind of being kind in this moment?
So you want me to comment on the recap you've done so far, or just this particular scene?
Well, you could do the whole recap.
Yeah, I feel if I don't, I'm gonna lose your synopsis and lose where I'm at in the movie.
For sure.
So as far as Emmerich goes, it's pretty interesting because you kind of felt the minute he heard that knock on the door, he knew what he was gonna do.
Mm-hmm.
Just the way he reacted to it, he was just kind of like monotone, and when he was talking, he was kind of emotionless in dealing with everything. It's just like he saw his fate and he just accepted it. Because he was more emotional early on in the film, especially when he explained to Bob about his situation and how he's broke. And he was kind of emotional when he broke down and Bob got killed and he got caught lying and his whole world was crumbling around him. But here, all that emotion was gone. It's like you can fight fate for so long, and then you just kind of have to accept your reality. And I think he just, the minute he heard that knock on the door, he accepted it. And I just thought his scenes were hilarious. Of course, up until the tragic end, but the way he let the detectives in and then slammed the door in front of the cops' faces, I thought that was the funniest part of the whole movie. The cops started trying to walk in, they just slammed the door in their faces. And the detectives, they just started talking to him. They didn't even like make a big deal about it, you know. And they were just talking to him directly. And the way he was talking to Marilyn Monroe and just telling her, yeah, tell him the truth. He didn't even like imply like, tell him what really happened. He didn't say like, all right, tell them you were lying or whatever. He just said, tell them,
Yeah.
And so he kind of left it a little bit ambiguous in like, does he want her to lie or not? Um, so I thought that was interesting. And you're right, writing the letter to his wife, and then tearing it up. It kind of amplifies like his whole relationship with her in a way, in that he never did right by her, and he's thinking like, all right, this is my chance to do right by you. And you don't know if he's thinking in a way, well, I don't want her to feel sorry for me because I treated her poorly this whole time. Like, why have her mourn me after I'm gone? You know, I think maybe that was just him cutting her a break in a way and letting her go. Maybe I'm wrong. Who knows? I like it being ambiguous because you can interpret it how you want. But I just view that as, because they did have kind of a decent moment together when they were playing cards. You kind of felt there's, she was a little bit happy. She was doing up her hair. She felt like she kind of gave you the impression that little snippet of a scene where she's doing her hair, that like, oh, this isn't something he regularly does with her. This is kind of like a big moment for her,
Hmm.
plus a throwaway moment for him. So, and then, I thought it was interesting, but I kind of saw, again, I didn't remember this movie. I don't think I seen it, honestly. But I kind of saw the suicide happening because just of the way he was acting, it's like it seemed very odd and inconsistent with his character. I think he just kind of accepted his fate. I thought Marilyn Monroe was hilarious. Because first of all, I didn't think we'd see her again because we saw her early on, and then they talk about her off screen. There was like a phone conversation where it's like they could have showed her side of that phone conversation that he had with her. They didn't. The
Hmm.
detectives came into the precinct and they talked about interviewing her. We didn't see her. They could have showed us. I'm like, oh, they're just not going to show us her again. So I
Hmm.
was kind of happy we did see her again. And yeah, you never think of her being a good fit for a noir, but she just basically played ditzy and it worked.
Yeah.
It's just like, are we still gonna go on vacation? It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, we're gonna go on vacation, honey. You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to San Quentin together. It's just like, but yeah, I thought all that was well done. Yeah, the fact that Caruso, not Caruso, Lewis, died off screen. I mean, that was fine. We didn't need to. That story was told the minute he got shot in the shootout. We didn't need any more. I think the other scene of just showing the wife and Gus interacting was enough. We didn't need to see any more of those characters. And Gus, it was interesting. Gus stayed true to his character. He kind of was a softie and he had a heart of gold. I think him empathizing with the stray cats showed you like, hey, like he may have his flaws, he may make poor decisions, but he's not a bad guy to a certain extent, in a certain context. And who did he dislike? He didn't dislike anyone that got him into that situation. He disliked the person who snitched. So
Hmm.
he took responsibility for where he was, but he has a certain integrity that he didn't like with Kabi, and that was the only person he kind of lashed out on. He kind of warned his friends, hey, this is going
Yeah.
to happen. And again, Doc, very pragmatic, straight throughout the whole movie, very pragmatic with everything. And we finally get to his fate at the end. And
Yes.
the scene where the girl is dancing, and that does play off because we saw him with the calendar early on, flipping through the
Hmm.
young girls. So yeah, I mean, if this movie were made today, maybe without censorship back then, he's more like a Epstein, Jeffrey Epstein. this perversion for young girls.
Yeah,
Maybe that's it. Maybe he's not just this innocent guy. Maybe he has his dark side to him. Um,
yeah,
some of the
yeah.
worst criminals, they're completely nice. Like serial killers, when they get caught, and they interview the
Mhm.
neighbors, he was always such a nice guy. But then he was
Yeah.
eating people, inside his killing people and eating them. So it's like
Yeah.
it kind of plays out kind of like, I think he does have a dark side, and maybe he is into pedophilia and young girls and things like that. But this was just their way of telling it in the 50s.
Yeah, well, that's what I was wondering. Like, is he, because he's been pretty likable all throughout. And then this moment is the one where you kind of go, well, what's he doing here? Like, like when he just gives her the nickels, if he had just walked away, I would have thought, oh, he's just being kind. He's giving her the nickels. But he sits down and watches her dance, and the camera is almost leering at her. Her body is kind of really approaching the lens of the camera. And is that supposed to be his POV? And is he lusting after her? Like, what is going on there? I find it very interesting. And I do wonder, are they trying to give us an undercut to his character? We've kind of liked him all along, and now there's something a little weird going on here. I don't know. But yeah, it's very interesting. And so meanwhile, there are police who are watching through the window. They're watching him watch the girl through the window. And when they come out of the restaurant, for the whatever, the restaurant, they kind of talk.
I think it was a diner.
Diner, yeah, diner. The policemen stop him, they talk to him, and they wind up finding the jewels in his coat and arresting him. And he says, how long have you guys been out here? And they say 2 or 3 minutes. And he says, about as long as it takes to play a phonograph record. And I guess in this moment, Doc is realizing his mistake. He took the time to sit and watch the girl dance for one song. And had he left, maybe the police wouldn't have seen him, wouldn't have stopped him. Maybe he would have gotten away. So kind of an interesting moment. So meanwhile, Dix is, he's apparently losing blood, and he passes out at the wheel of the car. And so Dahl takes him to see a doctor, and the doctor's going to report this gunshot wound, even though she lies and says it's a car accident or something. But he realizes what's going on, and he kind of gets out of there. They leave. Then at a press conference, Lieutenant Dietrich, we find out, is in jail, and he's going to be tried. So I guess they know now that he was a corrupt cop. And the commissioner says it's not anything strange that there are corrupt officers in police departments. The dirt they're trying to clean up is bound to rub off on some of them, but not all of them. Maybe 1 out of 10, or sorry, 1 out of 100. And so then he kind of demonstrates, he turns on the police radio and he shows how many calls are coming in, and he basically is saying police are overworked, they're trying to get to all these places. And he says, suppose we had no police force, good or bad. The jungle wins. The predatory beasts take over. So is he saying that bad cops are better than no cops? Is that what he's saying in this moment? And then he notes that 3 of the 7 suspects have died, and 3 others are arrested and in jail, and there's only 1 still on the loose. And he's a hardened killer, a hooligan, without any human feeling or human mercy. And I find this very, very interesting and very affecting. It kind of reminds me of a movie that will come much, much later called Unforgiven with Clint Eastwood. Because at the end of that movie, we kind of get the sense that his character is completely unforgiven. He's sort of seen as this terrible, nasty person, no redeeming qualities. But we know different because we've been watching the movie and we've gotten to know him. And I feel that that's kind of where we're at here, is that we've gotten to know these guys. And it's not just Dix. He's talking about Dix. and certainly we've seen Dix has a human side, and he has this sort of philosophy or whatever you want to call it, where he's a good guy, and he's not going to do wrong, even though he's a criminal. And so I guess I might as well go on to say here that this Dix basically proves him wrong in this moment, because he sort of continues on until he gets to, I guess, where he came from, and we see that he's arrived at the farm that he wanted to get back to, and he runs out into the field, and he winds up collapsing, and Dahl sort of runs off to try and get help, and horses actually come and sort of seem to be nuzzling him or checking him out, and that's kind of how the movie ends. But I think that in this moment we're seeing the humanity, of this character. So the commissioner has just said, he has no human feeling, and here he is. He's doing something very human. He's trying to get back to his childhood. He's trying to, he definitely has human feeling. But I think that all the characters do, and see Ciavelli with his family and how he cares about his family, and Gus with his kindness and his generosity, and even his hurt feelings. When the wife kind of says something nasty to him about being a hunchback, and he kind of says, hey, no, that's just the way I was born, or whatever he says, and you can kind of see that he's definitely human, and Doc, again, as the gentleman bandit who always seems to be the voice of reason. So yeah, I found that very interesting, that it was summed up with this kind of, he's a hardened killer with no human feeling, but then we kind of get this one more scene where we kind of see that he does have human feeling. At least that's the way I see it. So what do you think about all this?
Yeah, I thought everything wrapped up pretty much how it should, based on how everything was set up. Louis, the family guy, he died. His family is mourning for him. Again, with these type of movies where it's just like it's this journey or mission or quest film, and these characters think the goal is to get this money or the drugs or the jewels, and that's going to make their life better. And in reality, they just need to look inward, and they have everything they need. They just don't see it. And it's just like Louis, he had a wife and a kid. He didn't need to do this. He could have just, if he would have stayed on the straight and narrow, he would have been fine. Gus, heart of gold, but he cared for the wrong people. He made bad decisions, and his kindness ended up getting him where he is. Trapped in a hole. Even you could say that about all these characters. All of their end came from their own flaws. Even with Dix, he just wanted to be with the horses. In the end, if he would have just went out there, he didn't have to commit anything, because he didn't get any of the money anyway. The little bit of money he got, he gave back some to Doc. So it's like, Dahl, she should have just said how she felt. Maybe that would have changed things. But you just see all the flaws that were set up, all the things that the characters thought they needed that could have made their lives better if they would have done this caper. They should have just stayed away from it and just looked within themselves, and could have been a happier ending for all of them. With that said, two things I will note. I love the subtlety in the writing, in that a lot of things are up for your interpretation, and a lot of things that happen at the end were set up at the beginning. The one thing that I thought was not great writing, felt kind of tacked on, were two things. One is that whole cop thing. It's like my eyes were rolling when he was like flipping those switches, but I'm like, that's probably just a mandate by the Hays Code or something, or like, censorship. But God, were my eyes rolling when he was flipping those switches. What if there were no cops? It's like, come on, dude. Every time there's like a police shooting here in the States, there's always like, people saying that, like, what if there were no cops? But so that stuff annoyed me, but I think that's more of a mandate. And the other thing that I think wasn't necessary is Doc saying how long the cops were there. I thought the story told itself, and it was kind of implied that if he didn't watch the girl dance, then he would have gotten away. And even if you
Yeah.
couldn't figure that out with the setup at the beginning with him looking at the young girls, or with the cab driver saying, "Hey, we gotta go," and he just wants to look at the girl. That one shot, the one creative shot in the whole film, where the girl dances and then it zooms in on the diner glass, and you see the cops looking in. That shot told you all you needed to know. We didn't need the dialogue to spell it out for us. I thought that
Mhm.
scene could have just been left on the editing room floor. It shouldn't have even been written, because it spelled things out too much, just like the suicide thing. Like they didn't spell that out and it worked better, you know. So
Mhm.
I just thought that and the cop, those are the only two writing things that I didn't like in the film. But aside from that, I thought everything was good down to the last shot. I thought was really good. A really tight, well told story, great writing, what you would expect from John Huston. Very good John Huston film. I think it's hurt by the lack of creativity in the way that the film is shot. And I think it's also hurt by the fact that we've seen this story played out so many times. We don't know what it's like to be in 1950, haven't seen this film for the first time, so we don't truly know how impactful it should be. We can just assume, but we can't feel the impact, even though our mind tells us, like, oh, this is a really, really important film. Unless we feel it, it doesn't really connect with us. I think that's why it's not as high on his list of his films, but it's definitely quality wise, it's amazing.
Yeah, I agree, and I think what you said there about perhaps the Hayes Code is the reason why we needed some of this stuff about Lieutenant Dietrich being in jail and he's going to be prosecuted. I mean, in a way, it would have been more interesting if we just didn't hear about him. You know, like we know he's corrupt, and he turned on the guy and turned him in. You know, but I think they kind of had to say that to satisfy the code, and perhaps even the other stuff about yeah, okay, there are some corrupt cops, but most of them are okay. And what if there were no cops? And I mean, my only question is he saying it's better to have bad cops than no cops? I mean, it kind of seems like that's what he's saying there, and I'm not sure that that's really something that should be said, but in any case, yeah, it was very interesting ending, and yeah, I really liked the movie. And like you, I feel that I saw it before, but so much of it was just brand new to me. So I'm not sure if I actually saw it before. Maybe I just saw part of it. I don't know, but definitely worth seeing, and I will be watching it again in the future. I think it's really good.